Hello, this is Robert Rickover at Body Learning, and today my guest is Ian Cross, who's an Alexander Technique teacher and swimming instructor in Pembrokeshire, which is in West Wales, United Kingdom. Ian has set up a learning center called Swimming Without Stress with his wife Cheryl in 1996. He holds an amateur swimming association teacher certificate, and he trained with Stephen Shaw, who is another Alexander teacher who kind of pioneered the application of the Alexander technique to swimming. Uh, Ian has also appeared on ITV, a program called The Test in 2003, where he is shown helping an aquaphobic lady overcome her fear of water over a course of 10 lessons. He's also the author of Swimming Without Stress, Lessons for Land Lovers, and video clips of his TV appearance and information on ordering that book are available on his website, and we'll be putting a link to that near the interview. Ian, welcome to the program today.
Thank you, Robert.
Could you say a little bit about how you first realized that the Alexander technique might, and maybe even if you're okay with it, providing a very short definition of the Alexander technique, how the technique, how you when you came to the point where you realized the Alexander technique would be a useful adjunct to teaching swimming.
Well, shortly before I started training to teach swimming, I'd had some Alexander lessons, and I, I'd read a bit of, stuff on the Alexander technique. Um, I was working at the time as a careers advisor, and I was, which was an office-based job, and I, I found that it made me very aware of the tension that I was sort of putting into all the activities that I was doing in my daily life, particularly, um, and uh, and I was very impressed with the approach of the Alexander teacher who gave me one-to-one lessons. The gentle approach, the never rushing to get me to achieve anything, but and enabling me to make changes that 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 happened sort of almost indirectly, to improve things. Um, and when I started training to teach swimming, I found that that kind of approach was missing. I mean, for one thing, I'd benefited hugely from hands-on experience, from the teacher putting his hands on me and enabling me to move differently, and in order to guide me to into a new experience. Now, when I first started training to teach swimming, at that time we were told that we really mustn't touch people, especially children. So that was one big sort of gaping sort of obvious uh, difference in the approaches of the Alexander teacher and the approach of the ASA really at the time. I felt, that seems bizarre that I'm going to be teaching people who, and a lot of people that you're teaching as a swimming teacher are people with fear of water, non-swimmers with fear of water. So how are you going to go about getting them to learn to swim without being able to touch them? Um, so, without necessarily getting in the water with them. At the time, I mean, I think it's important to say just how much that's changed over the last sort of 10, 15 years, partly because of the work of Steve Shaw. I think he's influenced swimming teaching quite a lot, because certainly 15, 20 years ago, generally you weren't allowed to touch people really, and you weren't generally in the water with somebody. So as soon as I started having a bit of a go at teaching on my own, um, I was getting in the water straight away with people and putting my hands on them, and I felt that the information that I had from the Alexander technique, the confidence I had about how the hands-on sort of stuff worked from Alexander lessons, I felt it kind of gave me license to do that.
Hmm. So, if someone were to come to your center who either wanted to learn how to swim or wanted to improve their swimming, how could you say? Could you sort of describe what a lesson would be like for them? What would happen when they came to you?
Well, if we take a non-swimmer, somebody who wants to learn to swim, somebody who's never swam before,
Hmm.
the first the, the first job is to get them to enjoy just being in the water. So we'd sometimes people, many people are afraid of even just getting into water. The thought of getting into sort of 3 foot of water and standing there will be quite scary for people. So the first thing you want to do is give them a positive experience of being in the water, because it doesn't take very much to show somebody how pleasurable being in the water can be. And the first thing that you've got to look at really is somebody's attitude towards breathing in the water. Um, People have a lot of misconceptions about what they've got to do in order not to drown. So if you can get people to see, first of all, that if they gently let the air out into the water, then breathing, that the whole business of breathing when you're in the water pretty well takes care of itself. Obviously, what you can't do is you can't breathe in underwater, and so basic things like that. When you show somebody, the job is to let the air out and not to breathe in. And once people can put the face in the water and start comfortably letting the air out into the water, that already changes their relationship with the water. So for a non-swimmer, you're going to give them as much of an experience as you can straight away of letting go into the water. And soon after you've got people putting their head in the water and breathing, you can get them floating and gliding. To start off with, you're going to be in the water with them, giving them hands-on guidance, giving them support. But already in one lesson, a non-swimmer can get that experience of the enjoyment of being under the water and supported by it. Now, often swimmers as well will be given that same sort of experience in the first lesson, because a lot of people who are even quite accomplished swimmers still don't really use the support of the water. People will tend to sort of swim lengths with their head held out of the water. That's in the UK. That's certainly a very common way of
Hmm.
people
And in the
swim.
States as well. I can tell you. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I always thought I remember Steve Shaw saying that generally people in the States were better swimmers than in the UK. I think he said that teaching traditionally was in the UK. It's such a common thing for people to swim with their head out of the water, whereas in front crawl people tend to in the States people tend to learn front crawl, so more people do swim with their head in the water. I was always under the impression,
Hmm.
but certainly in the UK, there's a huge number of people even now who who persist in swimming with their head out of the water, and I think information it's more and more well realised, recognised that swimming with your head held out of the water's not a good idea, but still plenty of people do it, and I think often people in the medical profession, advise that people should swim. If people have got bad backs or if people are obese or arthritic, doctors, GPs will often say, why don't you go swimming? But if somebody can't swim reasonably well, or if somebody's swimming with their head out of the water, it may, of course, be doing them more harm than good.
Yeah.
But
Okay. I'd like to just comment on that. I don't really know uh, what the differences, exact differences between swimming in the UK and the USA are, but certainly I'm a fairly regular swimmer myself, and in the pool I use, I often see people who never get their hair wet, and it's kind of amazing to me that anyone would swim that way. But I think that part of it in the little experience I've had with working with people swimming is that some people are just plain terrified to put their head underwater even forgetting about the breathing side of it just for a moment. It's a kind of a terrifying thing to do.
Yeah,
Have you found that to be the case?
yes, I think a lot of people are. I mean, generally anybody who swims with their head out of the water probably is a little bit afraid about the idea of putting the face in, and it's very easy to get people to see that it's just not half as scary as they imagine. I mean, it's a bit of a trip into the unknown for people because people don't realise what breathing in and around water involves, and everyone can breathe out, of course, and one thing that I often get people to do is sing into the water,
Hmm.
because if you're using your voice, you know exactly what's going on with your breathing. So it's to, the breathing out into the water is not it's not really an issue. People are terrified of it, and people often think that's the problem. People think I can't put my face in the water. That's why I can't swim, and that's why I'm never going to be comfortable in the water. But it never normally takes more than one or two lessons to get someone reasonably comfortable with putting the face in the water. The more the more challenging thing for people actually is the business of letting the water support them, and more than that, actually, being able to regain the feet when they're in shallow water. So now a lot of people, even swimmers, even swimmers who swim with their head in the water, don't really trust the water to support them. So that can be quite revealing that you can get someone who looks like they're quite competent in the water, and you ask them to just lie in the water and do nothing, and it's really quite a struggle for them. People will brace themselves as though they have to do something to hold themselves up.
Mm. So, would that be a good test for someone who isn't sure whether they're really giving their weight to the water to just lie flat on their stomach and see what happens?
Yes, I mean what I think is the thing to think is let the head go, try and let the head sink. So even the idea of lying flat on the stomach, it might suggest that you should be sort of horizontal.
Hmm.
But what I like to find out is what happens when you let your head sink. Now, for example, when I just lie in the water and let my head sink, if I'm in shallow water, my feet just sink straight to the bottom. And that's just the way it is. Now, I can do various things to make myself float horizontally, but what's interesting is what happens when you do nothing. Not what do you need to do to make yourself float, as people imagine, but what happens when I do nothing. And when I and it's the same for most people. When you let your head go, the head floats. And if you think I'm going to let my head sink to the bottom, you'll very quickly get to a point where the head's really going nowhere. The water's got it. And of course, add to that sense of letting the water support the head. Add a bit of momentum, a bit of movement, and you're going to be floating beautifully in order to be able to swim.
Hmm. So you would work with you'd be in the pool with someone exploring this idea of letting the water support them.
Yeah, and usually I'm gonna look at doing that probably in the first lesson actually with a non-swimmer. I'm gonna be by the time first I'm going to get over this thing about this misconception that if I put my face in the water something horrible is going to happen. So I'm going to get someone to see that actually when I put my face in the water and do nothing, nothing happens. I don't even need to breathe out. But it's nice to know that if I do breathe out, everything goes fairly smoothly. But once I've got that out of the way, then I can get to the nitty gritty of someone's head neck relationship with the water, really. So, I mean, I often think that it's the first thing we have to do with non-swimmers particularly, but also anybody who wants to improve their relationship with the water. The first thing we have to do is to look at the breathing into the water, but only really so that we can look at the head neck relationship, because I think from an Alexander technique point of view, what's primary is the head neck relationship. So, and actually, once you've got over this thing that about breathing into the water, then you can start to let the head go, and then the breathing starts to become more natural. So when you once you're not afraid of the idea of putting the face in, then you can start letting the head float and seeing how easier that makes the breathing. When we're just letting the head go, the air tends to just want to come out.
Hmm.
So those are the first things that I'm going to want to explore with any swimmer, really,
So I would
because
think if you're lying face down in the water and you're really letting your head you're letting go of any holding of your head and just letting it drop wherever it's going to go. That's very likely to also involve your neck becoming a lot freer than it was before.
absolutely, and
And I
I mean,
think we
for
should say here that this business, you've mentioned the head neck relationship. In the Alexander world, the head neck, let's say head neck torso relationship, is considered extremely important, both in determining how you coordinate yourself overall, and uh, also where is a useful place to intervene if you want to improve your coordination. So Alexander teachers just teaching ordinary lessons, forgetting about swimming for a moment, will tend uh, to work with that area of a student pretty much right from the beginning. So it sounds like from what you're describing that you're just taking that into the environment of the pool.
yes, and it's generally it's much easier to do that in the water for me, I find, than it is on dry land, and there are a few reasons for that.
Hmm.
One is that people will generally stiffen their necks and hold their head in an inappropriate relationship to the spine much more in the water than they would on dry land. It exaggerates people's patterns of misuse. So, and the other thing is that instead of releasing the head into nothing, instead of letting the head go on letting it be free on top of the spine as you might wish to do, when you're as I'm sitting here now, I might wish for my neck to be free, but it's not as easy as me having the stimulus, which soon becomes a pleasant stimulus for everybody, of having the water to let the head be supported by. So when as you suggested earlier, when I simply just wish for the water to support my head, it absolutely will every time. When I wish for my neck to be free so my head goes forward and up, it may well, it may well not, my wish may not be granted. But in the water, every time I wish to let the water support my head, pretty well it will support it. So people can be, I would say generally people coming to the water who are nervous of swimming are going to be stiffening their necks possibly even more than they would be sitting in front of a chair, for example.
Mm.
Um, but
Well,
they can also get
especially if there's a fear factor there, they're almost certain to be stiffening their necks more, right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
and even in somebody who's terrified of the water, you can get you can pretty well with if you're supporting them, you can quite easily get them to really let go of a lot of tension in the neck and let the water support the head. And it's quite easy to check. You can can you move someone's head? Are they if they're lying in the water and really thinking about the head sinking, the chances are you'll be able to take the head and just move it from side to side a little bit, and that will indicate that there's some freedom there. And so it's very it's I remember Steve Shaw saying that whatever's going on tends to be magnified by the water. So if you're stiffening up in response to being in the water, you'll probably stiffen up more than you ever do on dry land. But when you when you let go in the water, it's because of the support of the water. It's easier to let go in the water than it is on dry land.
So, from what you're saying, it almost sounds like having some Alexander uh, lessons in the water, even for someone who was not particularly interested in swimming, might be a pretty good, might be useful in terms of carrying, of achieving greater release than they could on dry land and carrying some of that release with them in their ordinary activities.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about carrying some of the release with them, but
I'm thinking
certainly,
of table work here, which is an Alexander teaching procedure where a student is lying on their back and has some support under their head, their knees are elevated. And the whole idea of table work really is to show a student some possibilities that they might not be able to achieve if they were having to deal with the gravitational field, standing or sitting or whatever. But it almost sounds from what you're saying that properly done, some work in the water lying face down might achieve some of that same extra release. Of course, the trick would be how do you take it back into ordinary activity?
yeah. Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think in the right hands, an experience for a non-swimmer can be akin to Alexander table work, and of course you have got that advantage of being able to release in a prone position, which is we don't do very much in the Alexander work, unless we do crawling perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
But also you can do the same kind of work on the back. I mean, I should say it's just as important to get someone comfortable on their back as it is on the front, really. But we tend to address the front first because of the issue about breathing.
So once you've gone through some of those preliminary steps and a person is no longer afraid to have their head in the water and you've shown them a few things about breathing, where would you go next in terms of working with them?
Well, I think that adults learning to swim um, needs to go through that sort of phase of development that a child would go through of learning through play. Now, often non-swimming adults are quite anxious to make progress, and but if you rush too quickly into kind of teaching them, if you rush too quickly into teaching them the strokes, um, I find that can just lead to more anxiety because it's difficult not to present some kind of stroke work as something that the pupil's got to get right. So my the next thing that I want to do once I've got someone understanding that they can float and let the water support them, and most significantly, once they're able to regain their feet on their own, once they're independent in the water, um, I encourage them to play really. Um, so we've got a term that we use for people when myself and Cheryl when we're deciding what we should do next with someone who say has come here on a residential course and say a couple of lessons, 2 or 3 lessons into the course they're independent, and we'll say, well, especially if it's a male, we'll say, oh, bloke on holiday. We've got this term bloke on holiday, and because after if someone's been a non-swimmer for a lifetime and they come on a course with us, we're not looking for them to be, Mark Spitz by the end of the week, um, but we want them to be enjoying the water. So I'm thinking that I want someone to be able to swim around with a face in the water with a nice free neck, um, looking at the bottom of the pool, pretending that perhaps they're swimming with fish because that's something that they might want to do on holiday, and just moving the arms and legs around any way they like, really, just exploring movement. So that's my first thing that I want to get people doing, moving through the water, but without any real form beyond keeping the neck free.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then once people are really comfortable doing that on the front and back, then we start looking at strokes. But when non-swimmers come to us for a week, um, we we often we won't look at we won't do a lot of work on the conventional strokes.
So your approach really is your main interest in say a week long workshop or beginning lessons for someone would be just to have them be very comfortable in the water
Yes,
and
yes,
kind of creating a framework within which if they then want to learn specific strokes, say from a most likely from a non-Alexander trained swimming instructor, they can do that without those old fear reflexes coming into play.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. I think, if you asked me that sort of 10, 12 years ago, I wouldn't have said that because I would have felt that the only way to teach swimming and to teach the strokes would be Steve Shaw's way because that helped me with my own swimming so profoundly, Steve Shaw's work, that I had no time for any other type of teacher, But actually, I don't really see it like that these days. I feel what you've just said there is absolutely right. Uh, because of the residential course that we've been doing for sort of 7 or 8 years here, I've had to let go the idea that I'm going to take someone right through the process of non-swimmer to beautiful swimmer, and I've certainly had to let go of the idea that I'm going to do that in a week. So yeah, realistically, that's what I see is when people come as a non-swimmer, they come here for a week. I think we see it as our job to, as you say, get them over those fear reflexes, get them happy in the water, and then they can do what they like. They might have lessons with an ordinary non-Alexander technique swimming teacher. They might just continue to enjoy being in the water and to play. They might not have. They might. Uh, I might encourage them not to worry too much about being a brilliant swimmer, but just to continue enjoying being in the water. I mean, I think a lot of people who swim up and down the pool 3 times a week would benefit hugely from just doing a bit of gliding. So, I tend to think that the water is a sort of fantastic place to do Alexander's, or not necessarily Alexander's, but to work on ourselves. If we've had a stressful day at the office, um, if we've got this ability to just get into the water and do nothing, just to glide through the water and regain the feet calmly in a well coordinated way, I kind of feel that can be doing us a lot more good than the thing that people will be more likely to do, which is to sort of try and swim the stress out of your system, to get in and sort of plow up and down mindlessly, really.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think there's a place for just being in the water and playing, and I think I think that's I think it's so obvious to say that, but people who want to learn to swim tend to be too keen to actually be swimming up and down. And I'm always trying to encourage people just be happy to glide, be happy that you can glide. I mean, recently we've had someone that's come to us who's in his 80s, and he was very phobic and very wobbly, as he said himself, in the water. And it's actually taken us a couple of courses. He's been here twice to get him to just be able to float on his own. And of course now he's talking about coming back again because he can really see himself, doing the breaststroke. He really wants to be able to do the breaststroke. But I keep saying to him, why don't you just go to the pool and float? Because it will do you the world of good. And the more you do it, the more you do that, the more you get to know the water by just floating and gliding, the more able you'll be to learn anything else anyway.
Hmm.
People are very keen to move on. People are very keen to be a swimmer.
Yeah, I agree with you totally about the water environment being incredibly useful to put yourself in from time to time. Myself personally, I try to swim at least 4 or 5 times a week, and I find it the most pleasant, relaxing 45, 50 minutes of my day. And I think one of the things that makes it so useful to us is that, as you said, you're no longer vertical. You're horizontal typically, or possibly on your back if you're swimming on your back. So you're in a very different orientation with respect to gravity than you usually are when you're doing things, and you're in a completely different medium. So the gravitational field as it operates on you is operating a little differently because of that, and how you move is affected by the fact that you're moving through water and not air. And I think all of those differences from what we're used to provide an amazing learning opportunity, an amazing opportunity to, as you say, just have fun and explore them. And I would say for anyone listening to this show who's ever thought about learning to swim or even just learning to be comfortable in the water, um, the advantages are huge, really. Would you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and I think that somehow Alexander talked about carrying out an activity against the habit of life,
Hmm.
and I just think the water lends itself tremendously to that. Um, I think all those advantages that you've just described are great, and that's what I feel when I go for a swim too. Um, but for a lot of people, it's going to take a hell of a lot of work before, if they're a non-swimmer who's always been afraid of the water, it's going to be a long time before they can swim in the way that you do there, Robert. Swanning up and down the pool for 45 minutes, really exploring the difference between you know being vertical and horizontal while you're moving through the water. But uh, even at the very early stages of learning to swim, people can really work on carrying out an activity against the habit of life. Um, so, and I think there's a real place for that in the water too. Um, so, let's say that somebody's learning to get their head out of the water to breathe, which is a big hurdle for people when they're making that transition from non-swimmer to swimmer. And so now, when the idea comes to get the head out to breathe, people will generally go straight for the end. People will stiffen the neck and tighten their body and usually hoik themselves out of the water with their back and gasp for air and pull the arms back. In other words, people will go into a fear response. I mean, I think that the the panic reflex can be very easily elicited by the idea of getting the head out to breathe. Uh, and if you can think, right, well, I'm only going to do one. I'm just going to come out to breathe once. It doesn't even matter if I get a breath, but I'm going to try and do it without stiffening my neck. I'm going to try not to pull my arms back. I'm going to try and let my head lead. And then, whether or not I've got a breath, I'm going to go back to a glide and then calmly regain my feet. Um, if you've got a tendency to go into a kind of panic response when you try and get your head out to breathe, and you manage just once not to do that, as far as I'm concerned, you can get out and go home. It's so, and I think that's my that's often my message to people at the end of the week. Go to the water and yes, enjoy it, play and enjoy it, and love the feeling of being supported by the water and um, the changes that it makes to your breathing, the fact that it slows your movements down as you encounter the resistance of it, and all that. But also, you use it as an opportunity to work on yourself in a real sort of Alexander way.
Well, yeah, if you are a student of the Alexander technique, working on some of those ideas in a pool is just amazingly fascinating and useful. I can't think of a better place to explore Alexander's ideas actually than in the
Yeah,
water.
I
Um,
think it's true. I think
yeah,
because as Steve Shaw says, it magnifies what's going on. So, I mean, getting the head out to breathe, for example, is a very, very big stimulus for a non-swimmer. And yes, so it is a great opportunity to to explore Alexander's ideas.
so if someone's listening to this who thinks they might want to pursue the things that we've been talking about, and they don't happen to be in West Wales, and don't have access to an Alexander teacher who's also a swimmer, would you recommend that they have uh, Alexander lessons just on their own and then see about applying what they learn in the water? What would your approach suggestion be?
I think it's difficult to. I think if you could get an Alexander technique teacher to go with you into the water, um, that would be hugely beneficial. Whether or not they had a lot of experience of swimming, I think trying to work some of these things out for yourself is even with the, even. I mean, for example, when I've done workshops before with other Alexander teachers, although they're very quick, generally, as a compared to normal members of the population to pick new ideas up and so on. they will normally have the same kind of misconceptions about what you've got to do in the water as anybody else, you know. Um, and that's Alexander teaches. So I think that our kind of reasoning does tend to go out the window a little bit in the water. And even if we've learnt about it, I mean, for example, when I think about myself, I think you asked me before the interview um, how um, how I'd sort of made discoveries myself, and I think, well, I made discoveries before I met Steve Shaw, I think, about how a different approach could help non-swimmers in the water. But it wasn't until I met Steve Shaw, despite all the Alexander work I'd had before I met him, that I really realised how much I was pulling my head back in the water, and how even though I'd read his book, I had no concept of the fact of kind of allowing my body to lengthen to the extent I would go a little bit onto my side, and I would have no idea, you know, the idea about rotating the whole body to take a breath, to breathe. Despite having read that in Steve Shaw's book and trying to apply it myself, it was a million miles away from the experience that I got when I went to for a lesson with Steve Shaw. So, and I was a decent swimmer, you know.
Hmm.
So, so I think it's difficult to sort of start applying things, the sort of some of the basic stuff that we need to get hold of in the water about letting go and breathing. It, I suppose well, it would be like trying to apply the Alexander technique yourself, having read one of Alexander's books. But if there really wasn't any help at hand, I mean, there are some resources that can be useful, and I think that not only books, but these days there's a lot of good stuff on YouTube, and we've actually got a YouTube channel. And so, for example, something like the glide that I've been explaining, there's a YouTube on my YouTube channel, which is Swim Without Stress. Um, there's a there's a little clip of myself and Cheryl gliding, just doing a glide and regaining the feet. So you can get a bit of an idea through resources like that, and a lot of them are free. I think Steve Shaw's got a YouTube channel as well, and of course Steve Shaw's got a couple of well, quite a few DVDs and things like that that will be useful for people to see.
If there, even if there's no Alexander teacher in your area, it's possible you could derive some benefits from ordering Steve's DVDs or watching your YouTube videos, you think?
Yeah, yeah, I
So,
think so.
and if there is an Alexander teacher around, I would think just in terms of getting a little more freedom in your neck, for example, which is certainly going to be useful for swimming. A teacher who knows nothing about swimming can help you with that. So you'd probably
Yeah,
do well to have some lessons. Ideally, find a teacher who knows a little about swimming and is willing to go into the pool with you
yeah,
and show you some things.
or even if the Alexander Technique teacher knows nothing about swimming. I mean,
That-
you know that, or I suppose, well, no, whatever. I mean, I think an Alexander Technique teacher that you get on with, and who is giving you a bit of help in releasing your neck and so on dry land. If you could get them to the water with you, it would be very beneficial.
Absolutely. Ian, is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to that you'd like to mention?
No, I don't think so, Robert. I mean, I've focused a lot today on non-swimmers. I've been thinking about because I know how much of a kind of interest there is in. There's so many people, especially in the UK, I think, who who are non-swimmers or are not confident about being in the water. But of course, as we've only really touched on the possibilities for people. So as a swimmer like I was when I met Steve Shaw, for example, a decent swimmer who has nevertheless got all kinds of misconceptions about swimming, and of course those misconceptions result in strain. You know, um, so even someone who looks competent at the front crawl might have some kind of anxiety about the process of breathing, which will result in them going off balance to breathe, twisting the neck and head, and actually going off balance and getting into a position which would be impossible to maintain. So therefore, the breathing's rushed. I think that's very, very common. And so someone like myself, you know, Cheryl and my sister-in-law Chie, and who works with us, and obviously anybody that's trained with Steve Shaw can help with those, can significantly help those people. So people who do want to do things like open water swimming and triathlons, the Alexander Technique approach to swimming can really help those people as well.
So if you are a swimmer and you want to improve the quality of your swimming, the Alexander Technique in general and the swimming without stress programs specifically could be of tremendous benefit to you.
Yeah, and of course on our YouTube channel, you'll see also that we've got videos of ourselves swimming front crawl and breaststroke and backstroke, and talking through the fundamental points, really the points that were taught to us by Steve Shaw, back in the 90s.
So, and there are links to your YouTube channel on your website, I assume.
Yes.
So we'll put a link to your website next to this interview. Well,
Lovely.
uh, Ian, thank you so much for being on the show today. I've been talking with Ian Cross, who's an Alexander Technique teacher in Pembrokeshire, West Wales, UK, and along with his wife Cheryl runs a swimming and Alexander program called Swimming Without Stress. He's written a book on the subject. He's been featured on ITV, and you can find information about all of that on his website. Ian, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks very much.